Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today, we are talking about probably what you already know about, but that is Signal and the Department of Defense and other senior officials. Now, we're going to do this in the most non-political way. And if you're a longtime listener or follower of mine, you know that I have done videos over the years in the wake of these scandals, for lack of a better term, or situations, whatever you want to call it. Again, not getting political here, but my day job basically swims in compliance. And as I interact with members of the federal government, members of the private sector, et cetera, it's important to understand that we have standards and practices for a reason. So I'm going to give you my basic preamble that you've probably heard a million times, again, longtime listener or follower if you are, and that is cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. And so with that, let's dive in. And I want to give you the quick backstory here. So by now, I know you've heard the story. Basically, the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg was added, we assume accidentally, to a Signal group chat where several officials of the U.S. government were present or involved, including the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and others. So Mr. Goldberg then confirmed that it was legitimate as it aligns with the actual times that Houthi rebels in Yemen were bombed by the U.S. military, which was the center of this Signal group chat. The official position in the aftermath of this of the White House and its surrogates has been multifold. So the White House acknowledged the legitimacy of these. However, White House communications officials quickly downplayed the release of these messages, noting that the Atlantic headline used the phrase attack plans rather than war plans. They also alluded to this being a no harm, no foul accident. They also noted here that nothing was classified. We're going to discuss that. Now, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt tweeted, and I quote, "The Atlantic has conceded these were not war plans. This entire story was another hoax written by a Trump hater who is well known for his sensational spin," end quote. Again, that is the press secretary for the White House. Now, this malignment then of Mr. Goldberg was then parroted by other White House surrogates, including the Secretary of Defense himself. Those are the facts that we know right now. That's essentially it. Everything else essentially is speculation or conjecture, including, basically people saying Goldberg is a Trump hater, sensationalist, whatever, or a seasoned journalist, et cetera, et cetera. I'll let you decide that. This is what people are saying. These are the facts that we know it, and the White House has acknowledged that this Signal group chat was indeed legitimate. So let's break this down and discuss a few different things here. First, we're going to talk about the compliance standards that the U.S. military typically uses for having conversations of this nature, not just within the military, but also when they include, the National Security Advisor, CIA, et cetera, et cetera. We're also going to talk about the typical security controls around conversations like this. In other words, how does this normally work when the military is building attack plans or war plans or anything else? Then we're going to talk about the Signal app and its security, and essentially why, or rather how the Signal app relates to U.S. military use. Can they use it? Can they not? Let's dive into the actual standards for that as well. And then finally, my brief thoughts on this situation. So strap in. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we are going to start with the compliance standards that the military typically uses for having conversations of this nature. Now, if you didn't know, for a sensitive conversation among U.S. military personnel, coordinating with, the CIA, the National Security Advisor, other top government officials, there are federal compliance standards and requirements. Now, these include the handling and the handling of classified information. And let's talk about classifications, because all information related to attack plans and military operations is classified under Executive Order 13526. That is from the Obama era, December 29, 2009. That governs the handling, marking, storage, and dissemination of classified information. Those typical levels when we are talking about attack plans, as the White House has acknowledged, is either 1, confidential, meaning if it gets out, it can do damage, 2, secret, meaning it can do serious damage, or 3, according to the executive order, top secret, exceptionally grave damage. So, a quick opinion on that. So logically, if the White House is acknowledging that these are indeed attack plans, as the White House press secretary literally stated publicly and tweeted out, this would indeed have a classification standard and would be considered at least confidential under the actual executive order that governs this. But there's a bit more to this because these standards are more. Now, typical security controls around conversations like this basically are quite frankly legion, given the involvement of the CIA and the National Security Advisor, not just the military. The conversations would most likely involve a sensitive compartmented information standard, or SCI. Now, SCI handling basically requires compliance with a couple of different things. First things first is the Intelligence Community Directive, or ICD 503. That basically outlines security risk management and certifications and accreditation for information systems that can be used. ICD 705 establishes SCIFs. Those are sensitive compartmented information facilities that ensures that secure environments exist for classified discussions. In other words, there is no eavesdropping in a SCIF. They're hardened facilities, and by virtue of that, you can talk freely about bombing Yemen or whatever else you want to talk about. On top of it, we also have the Director of National Intelligence, or DNI's, directives on classified intelligence handling, dissemination, and storage as well. Now, on top of this, military attack plans, especially if they're considered high-risk operations, and I do not know if this Yemen situation is or is not, those can fall under what are known as SAPs, or Special Access Programs, and those have even stricter guidelines. So, if Yemen would be understood to be basically an SAP, then DoD Directive 5205.07, which governs management, administration, and oversight of SAPs, is in place, as well as DoD Instruction 5205.11, management, administration, and oversight of DoDs. And then SAP access information also mandates specific clearance, need to know, facility, like physical protocols. And finally, in terms of the controls themselves, we also have the Communication and Information Systems Compliance Guidelines. Classified communication, voice, data, electronic, in this case electronic, must follow security requirements that are stipulated by FISMA, which is the Federal Information Security Management Act, that established, for the record, standards for information security among federal agencies. On top of it, we have all of the NIST guidelines, the National Institute for Standards and Technologies. Those standard, which is the umbrella security controls for the federal government, known as NIST 853, essentially is there for information security. And then there's also NIST 859, a special publication for categorization of this data as well. On top of it, we have the Committee on National Security Systems, or CNSS. They have policies and directives such as CNSSI 1253, which then specifically tailor the NIST 853 standards specifically for national security systems. We also have the National Security Agency standards as well for cryptographic requirements and communication security, or ComSec, which includes the use of what is known as a Type 1 cryptographic equipment. And so this is very, very complex. On top of it, there's the Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA. They have security technical implementation guides known as STIGs that essentially ensure that things are properly configured and set up right for those secure communications. And so all of that comes into play here. And they're using Signal. And so let's talk about the Signal app. It is considered a secure message app, but it's used commercially, meaning you can go on your iPhone and Android and download it and use it. So, does it meet the above standards that I just talked about, and can the military use it, given its lack of transparency? You have the ability, if we are talking in Signal, to send me a message and then have it burn after a certain amount of time, and therefore no record of it exists. The technical answer here, quite frankly, is no. So when the U.S. military, CIA, National Security Advisor, or other government officials are going to discuss sensitive military attack plans, and again, we are talking about attack plans per the White House, these conversations are subject to strict federal standards, including compliance with Executive Order 13526, which I mentioned before, the NIST standards I mentioned, ComSec standards from the NSA, basically for certification, DoD security directives, as I mentioned, the Intelligence Community Directives, or ICDs, I just laid out, not to mention the audit requirements. Official government-sanctioned secure communications must pass rigorous certifications and approval processes, which we'll talk about here in a second, not to mention transparency audits, continuous compliance checks. It goes far beyond simply having an app that can encrypt things and destroy things. And don't get me wrong, I love me some Signal, but I'm not messaging the White House with it. So, Here is the specifics as to why Signal, despite its reputation of having good security, and it does have good security as far as we know, fails to meet those specific standards that I have been literally talking about for about 10 minutes now. The first one is NSA and DISA certification requirements. Signal is not officially certified by the NSA or the Defense Information Systems Agency for handling sensitive or classified national security data. And again, attack plans fall under classification standards. Classified communication also requires NSA-approved encryption systems, such as Type 1 encryption, validated through NSA's Commercial Solutions for Classified, or CSFC, or Government Off-the-Shelf Solutions, or GOTS. Signal does not use NSA-approved encryption methods or hardware modules certified for classified communications, and therefore is excluded from conversations like this. On top of it, and this is the second point under controls, is the lack of audibility and transparency as well. Signal is private. It's an open source app developed by the non-profit Signal Foundation. I'm a big fan, for the record. And while its protocol is public, Signal itself does not provide government-level audits, accountability tracking, or compliance under FISMA. In other words, we have to have a paper trail to ensure that there's no fraud or malfeasance in the government. And while this may be classified, there is civilian oversight through Congress that allows basically elected members of Congress to review what the military does to validate that no fraud or malfeasance or crime has been committed. Official government systems require extensive logging, audit trails, and access controls to maintain accountability and oversight. Signal is specifically designed to minimize logging and metadata collection, and so it's unsuitable for official auditing and compliance standards for sensitive government operations. This is essentially the crux of it. On top of it, Signal hasn't met federal compliance standards. Standards like FISMA, CNSS directives, those mandate thorough risk assessments, vulnerability monitoring, patching practices, mandatory federal certifications for all information security, all of which Signal has not done. Signal lacks certifications and authorizations to basically handle any kind of data from basically the level of unclassified or controlled unclassified information, or FOUO, and above. So that's obviously a huge problem. On top of it, facility and infrastructure standards for Signal don't meet the federal requirements as well. Sensitive military and intelligence communications must occur in accredited secure facilities. Think of that SCIF I mentioned, basically using secure networks and endpoints with strict security standards. Signal runs on consumer devices, your Android or your iPhone, anybody can download it, and commercial cloud infrastructure, I believe they're on AWS, without specialized NSA-approved cryptographic or hardware isolation protections as required by ICD 705 that I mentioned earlier, or the SAP facility standards that I also mentioned as well. And finally, there is a risk of foreign influence or compromise. The military and intelligence community demands basically very deep supply chain security audits. That's why we have the new cybersecurity maturity model certification for the defense industrial base. And so Signal is trusted by many privacy advocates, myself included, but it's not publicly demonstrated formal supply chain compliance or due diligence as mandated by NIST 800-161. And so it cannot be used by the federal government as a result of it. That absence of formal transparency into development practices, personnel vetting, and security protocols further disqualifies Signal from classified government use. And so those are the nuts and bolts. And my thoughts, quite frankly, are this. I think this is a grave national security issue. I don't care if you love or hate the president. I don't care if you love or hate the Secretary of Defense or whatever. This is a problem through and through. First, I want to say that we know that both Russian and Chinese intelligence have been relentlessly trying to break into Signal for their own surveillance needs. What if they've already done that and we don't know it yet? Look at SolarWinds. How long was Russian intelligence in SolarWinds before basically FireEye caught them? Right? This is a huge problem. Also, if they had used proper secured equipment for these meetings, such as an NSA-certified secure video teleconferencing system, or SVTC, or an NSA-validated CSFC, which I mentioned before, compliance solutions such as BlackBerry's AtHoc, DISA-approved solutions, etc., or government-owned classified networks, think SIPRNet, and on, or other solutions. If they had used any of those, then they wouldn't have been able to attach their Office 365 or Gmail or whatever address book off their iPhone iPhone or Android into the ecosystem and accidentally invite a journalist, or God forbid, make a mistake and invite a Russian asset or the Houthis themselves into the chat. Remember, intelligence officials oftentimes are tasked with speaking or communicating with other foreign intelligent counterparts. So it's reasonable to say that, let's say, an operative for the CIA might have a whole bunch of address books, and phone numbers essentially filled with CIA or rather Russian, operatives. These are the things that actually happen when we are looking at this. And so, in my opinion, I think this is a deep national security concern, and I think it really does behoove the government, aka the House of Representatives and the Senate, to take this seriously and reinforce that no government official, especially those in those types of positions, should be using a non-approved messaging app. The government needs transparency. The government also needs security, and we have those standards. And so if they are coming out and saying officially, and the press secretary of the White House, the official voice of the president to the press, said that these are attack plans. And I just gave you the executive order that attack plans officially fall under, and there is a classification system that requires everything I just said. And I don't see how we get around that. And so I'm always, optimistic at any new administration. There are mistakes that have been made in every administration. We are human in general, and this could be a learning lesson, but I also think that this has to be an investigation and there has to be accountability, because my fear is this isn't the only signal chat that's going on sensitive information, and what else could potentially leak or get hit. And I think that's a national security problem we can all agree on. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private and secure. And if you're in the government, please stay super secure and transparent. Take care.